Welcome back to the 5 pillars of body composition. We're at presentation 3, which is lifting for hypertrophy. So we've covered off why energy balance is really essential to sort out when looking at changing your body composition. And then we talked about protein and why that's an essential macronutrient to increase during a body composition change as well. And now the third component is ensuring that we provide adequate stimulus to the body to change it structurally, right? To change our muscle mass. And the best way we can do that is through lifting for hypertrophy. So that's what this presentation is all about. It's pretty full on. It's an in-depth dive. So grab a cup of tea, grab a protein shake, whatever you need to do, get comfy, and we're going to jump straight in. So we need basically two main things to change our muscle mass. First of all, we need the nutritional component, and we've covered some of this already. The energy balance at the bottom, ensuring that we have adequate protein diversity and quality, ensuring that we have protein frequency throughout the day, so a certain amount of feedings throughout the day, and then overarching all that, making sure that we have enough total protein every day as well. And then, of course, overarching the whole pyramid is adherence, making sure that we can actually stick to what we have planned. So that's the nutritional component. But then when we dive into the training component, it gets a little more, it can be very simple, but it can also be very in-depth in science as well. So let's drop some knowledge on you and show you what it's all about. This is kind of a theoretical model of how hypertrophy occurs. We have imposed force demands, so you start lifting a load, whether that's a shopping bag or it's a dumbbell at the gym, and then requisite motor units are recruited, cross-bridging within active fibers occurs, force is then generated, tension is applied to each active fiber, and mechanical transduction occurs, causing myofibrillar muscle protein synthesis and hypertrophy. So what we're looking for across this whole spectrum is an increase in tension on a muscle and therefore an increase in muscle protein synthesis, causing long-term hypertrophy, as long as we've got, adequate nutrition, adequate recovery in place as well. So how do we actually build muscle mass? Hypertrophy is an enlargement of tissue through the expansion of cell size. So the cells in your muscles actually grow. Resistance training causes damage. Your body repairs damaged muscle fibers, and repaired myofibrils increase in thickness and number to create hypertrophy. All right, so our muscle fibers are not only increasing in number, but they're also increasing in thickness to create a larger muscle. Remembering this adaptation happens at rest, not while you are training. So there's a common misconception about training is that when you're in the gym, you're growing muscle. In reality, when you're in the gym, you are damaging muscle and you're breaking down muscle, right? And when we're out of the gym, when we're fueling ourselves, when we're resting, we're recovering, and we're sleeping, that's when we're actually doing that growing. So we're going to cover recovery in this presentation as well, and it's just such an essential component that too many people forget about, and I always have to pull myself up on it as well to making sure I am recovering adequately. Satellite cells help to add more nuclei to muscle cells and therefore contribute directly to the growth of myofibrils. And muscle protein synthesis must be greater than muscle protein breakdown. Basically, we need more amino acids to facilitate recovery and growth. And so, basically that comes down to ensuring that we have enough protein. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, and we need to make sure that we have ample amino acids coming in to ensure that muscle protein synthesis is higher than muscle protein breakdown when we're actually using amino acids for energy, and we actually want to be using them for growth, right? So ensuring that we have enough protein coming in basically is the takeaway there. So it's all well and good, saying we need to build muscle mass and, everyone should build muscle mass and whatever, but we have to actually know why it matters. What is it actually good for? Apart from looking good, which is the first one here, improving body composition, increasing lean tissue across the body is generally going to improve the physique of an individual. But there's other things that are beneficial aspects of building muscle mass as well. Increasing force production capacity. So increasing your strength, your speed, and your power. If anyone wants to get involved in high intensity sports, high power output sports, speed sports, anything like this, you're going to need to increase your hypertrophy, your muscle mass, to be able to lift more load over time and to provide more force on that, whatever that metric is, whether it's a barbell or whether it's you sprinting on a football pitch. Storing glucose. So think about people living with diabetes. When we have more lean tissue, that is like a sponge soaking up blood glucose and helping them to control their levels a lot better. So it's a great thing for people living with diabetes to focus on, is building some muscle mass. Increase bone mineral density. If you want to be like these happy, fun, crazy elderly people in the streets dancing, then we want to be focusing on building some lean tissue. And I, for one, want to be lifting well into my elderly years for as long as possible. And I want to be functioning. I want to be standing straight. I want to have good, strong bones. And the way we do that is by placing tension, placing stress on the muscles, and therefore placing tension and stress on the bones and increasing their bone mineral density. Okay, improvements in posture. As we know, lifting weights will improve that posture. Improvements in sex life. If you didn't know, lifting is going to help you in the bedroom, and a bunch more things as well. Of course, you can make up a whole bunch more things of why hypertrophy matters. But it's not just body composition. Yes, that's one of the main outcomes, but there are many other benefits to us building some lean tissue. Now, the problem with most fitness programs is that, number one, they focus on making you tired and not providing progressive overload. So anyone can develop a crazy fitness regime or put together a program or a workout that can make somebody tired. That's super simple to do. Everyone can do that. But tired doesn't equal results, and it doesn't equal progression. So this is one of the problems with the main fitness programs and gyms and facilities that we see in the modern day, is that they just don't provide that progressive overload component. They focus on calories burned and not quality of work. And, obviously this is, number one, a negative effect on people's psychology when they're going into train and only focus on how many calories they've burned, and trying to target consistently burning more and more calories and basically associating exercise with some kind of punishment tool. And instead of focusing on quality of work, quality of movement, appreciating how your body can move, progressing your movements and your strength over time, it's focusing on this kind of negative aspect of trying to burn calories. And in actual fact, when we're training, our focus shouldn't be on burning energy. It should be on progressing our lifts or progressing our movements and performing better over time. Another problem is they focus on movement and not smart exercise selection. So it's just a case of, let's throw a whole bunch of fun little exercises together to keep people entertained, instead of actually focusing on what's going to provide people results long term through smart exercise selection. And they're limited by their method, camp, or protocol, right? So if you're involved in a specific facility or exercise regime or community that follows one specific protocol, you're limited by that. You're limited by the progression methods of that protocol. And when you step outside of a camp, you can take bits and pieces from all different types of exercise modalities and take what you like and drop what you don't need and put them together to create a really, create that sweet spot for training for you specifically as an individual. So lifting foundations. What do we need to improve body composition? Basically, we need three things when it comes to training in the gym. And for the rest of this presentation, we're going to be focused on training in the gym with weights, progressive resistance training, your typical kind of bodybuilding style training, but we're going to break it down into a little bit more what's based on the research and the science. So we need three things. Number one, we need volume. So volume is just basically stating the total amount of work that we're doing, the total dose of work that we're doing. We need a certain amount of volume on our muscles each week to provide the stimulus for growth. Now, the key here is to do the amount of work that is challenging but allows you to recover. Too many people go into the gym just trying to smash themselves every single session, leave the gym super sore, leave the gym crawling out of the gym, all this kind of like bravado, kind of let's just crush ourselves type mentality. In reality, they probably don't need that amount of work to grow, but it's kind of this mentality of like work harder. What we need is the amount of work that is appropriate for our bodies, but allows us to recover in the appropriate time span before we train that same muscle group again. So generally this starts with around 10 sets per muscle group per week. So if you think about a muscle group, for example, chest, if I want to train 10 sets of chest in a week, I could do that all in one session. So I could do 4 sets of bench press, 3 sets of dumbbell incline press, and 3 sets of dumbbell flies. Cool, I've got my 10 sets there. However, I could also split those 3 exercises up over the week into 3 different sessions and still get my 10 sets for chest in that week. So I might do my bench press on the Monday, my dumbbell incline press on the Wednesday, and my flies on the Friday. So I've got my 10 sets across the week. Remembering that not all volume is equal. So 5 sets of 10 on a barbell squat is going to be very different to 5 sets of 10 on a leg extension, right? So keep that in mind when you are placing your sets throughout the week and choosing what exercises to use to meet your volume targets. When you're doing 5 sets of 10 on a squat, that creates a lot of systemic fatigue, global fatigue. It beats you up. Psychologically, it's very hard to do. When you compare that to doing 5 sets of 10 on a leg extension, it's going to be a lot of localized fatigue, a lot of pump in the actual quads. Joints are going to be probably okay. You're not going to be super physically beat up from doing 5 sets of 10 on a leg extension. It's not going to create a lot of systemic fatigue in the subsequent days. And it's not going to be super psychologically challenging to do either. So when you're selecting exercises, okay, cool, you might do, if you're doing 10 sets of quads in a week, you might do 5 sets of 10 on the squats, and then on another session, you might do 5 sets of 10 on leg extensions. Just so you break it up, and so you're not doing only 10 sets of 10 on the squats, which is going to really beat you up long term and create a lot of fatigue and potentially cause you to have to stop your training cycle early. And we're going to cover fatigue in a moment as well. And then 20 plus sets can be used for smaller muscle groups or single joint exercises. So things like, a leg extension or a bicep curl or a calf raise. These types of exercises, you might be able to push that volume up a little bit higher and train them a little bit more frequently as well, as they will recover a lot faster than a big muscle group such as your quads or your back or your glutes. So generally targeting around 10 sets per muscle group per week is a pretty good place to start for volume, and you can sort of you can allocate that throughout your week, whatever fits with your lifestyle and your preferences. Generally, we suggest most people don't just place all of their sets for one muscle group on one day, kind of the old bro bodybuilding style training where you train chest on Monday, back on Tuesday, legs on Wednesday, and you just do each body part once per week. Generally, what we see in the research is that training each body part 2 to 3 times per week is a better place to be for optimal hypertrophy. And that's when we start talking about frequency. So frequency of training, how often you train a body part. First of all, we need to find a frequency that allows you to achieve your intensity and volume goals that fits within your lifestyle. So we can put together the most optimal program of all time and give it to you and say, hey, go ahead and do this, you'll get the best results ever. But if you can't do that because of your lifestyle, maybe you're a CEO of a company, you have 3 kids, you have 2 dogs, and your time is very, very valuable to you, likely you're not going to be able to go and do a 6-day per week program where you're spending 1 hour and 45 minutes in the gym each day. That's not going to happen. So it all comes back to what can you do within your lifestyle, and then we can work around that to create the most optimal program based on your own kind of restrictions. Generally, what we see is 2 to 3 times per week training a muscle group is optimal for muscle growth. Smaller muscle groups can benefit from high frequencies, for example, 2 to 4 times a week. So like we talked about, your biceps, your calves, they might be able to train a little bit more frequently. So if you can only train, twice a week, you might do 2 really high volume sessions. So if you're only training twice a week, you're going to try and fit in your 8 to 10 sets of 8 to 10 sets per muscle group in across those 2 different sessions. So it's a lot higher volume of work within those 2 sessions. We're going to go a little bit harder. We're going to bring the intensity up a little bit more. But if you can train 5 days a week, 6 days a week, then we can reduce the volume in those sessions a little bit, spread out the volume per muscle group across the week a little bit better, and do 5 or 6 lower volume but quality sessions. So it's all about what can you do. Generally, most people training anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week is going to be optimal. Doing 6 and 7 days a week, I don't generally recommend it for most people unless they're needing a significant amount of volume. And then at the same time, I have tons of clients that only train once or twice a week, and we get incredible results because we focus on providing quality work with a significant amount of volume per muscle group in those 1 or 2 sessions. So it's about finding what works for you. And then the last component of the lifting foundations is intensity. So you can do as much volume as you want. You can do 30 sets of an exercise per week. But if you don't have a certain threshold of intensity within those 30 sets, you're not going to be growing, because it's just not going to be stimulative enough for growth. And vice versa. You can be training as hard as you can, absolutely going to the wall on every single set and going past failure on every single set. But if you're only doing 1 or 2 sets per muscle group per week, you'll grow to a certain level, but you'll be leaving some growth in the tank, and you won't be optimizing your training. So it's kind of finding the sweet spot between your volume of work and the intensity that we want to train at. So we want to train hard through a broad spectrum of rep ranges, and generally 6 to 20 rep ranges is a really good place for hypertrophy based goals. And even up to 30 repetitions at some points, like for example during COVID lockdown, we see a lot of people having to train with higher rep ranges. But if we keep the intensity really high, meaning the proximity to muscular failure, we can aim to optimize muscle growth up to around 30 repetitions as well. But generally, as a rule of thumb, 6 reps up to 20 reps is a great place to sit for most of your exercises geared towards hypertrophy, geared towards muscle building, with on average 2 reps in reserve. So that basically means 2 reps from failure at the end of a set. So if you're doing a set of 10, you should finish that set feeling like you could only do 2 more repetitions, and that would be a very, very hard set of 10. So this is on average, and throughout the course of a mesocycle of training, sort of a 6 to 8 week period, we generally start people at around 4 repetitions in reserve. So they've got 4 reps in the tank at the end of each set. So if I'm doing a set of 10, I should feel like I could do another 4 at the end of that set. And that generally looks like the bar starts to slow down a little bit. Things start to get relatively hard at that point. And then towards the end of their mesocycle, their 6 to 8 weeks of training, we would probably progress that to a point where reps in reserve decreases, 2 reps in reserve, 1 rep in reserve, 0 reps in reserve, to the point that we're training to failure. But it would save that towards the end of a mesocycle before we deload, take a recovery week, and let fatigue dissipate. So on average there, training 2 reps in reserve from failure, ensuring that the intensity is high enough. So for free weights and multi-joint movements like barbell squats, deadlifts, barbell rows, these types of movements, anywhere from 4 to 10 reps is a good place to sit. Lower reps require more sets. So for example, if you're doing, a set of 4 on a barbell row, you might want to do 4 or 5 sets as opposed to just 2 or 3. And then on machine multi-joints, we're looking at 6 to 15 repetitions. So this might be things like a lat pull down, a machine chest press, things like this. 6 to 15 reps is probably a good place to sit. And then for some of your isolation movements like your bicep curls, calf raises, things like this, 10 to 30 reps is totally cool, taking these ones a little bit closer to failure. So if we put all this together, looking at volume, frequency, intensity, we want to make sure that first of all, you're training within the restrictions of your own lifestyle, ensuring that you can actually commit to the training program that you set for yourself. Ensure that you've got adequate volume spread across the week for each muscle group. Generally starting around 10 sets per muscle group per week is a good place to be. And then we want to ensure that the intensity is there, ensuring that we're training close enough to failure, and we're not just going in there to just have a joyride in the gym. As Tony Gentlecore likes to say, weight training shouldn't tickle, right? It should actually feel like you're training pretty hard and we're taking the intensity up. So from there, what do we need to do next? We need to say you've got your initial program sorted, and we're going to give you a summary of all that stuff we just covered at the end of this presentation as well. But once you've got all that sorted, you need to be able to progress the stimulus. And like we talked about before, some of the main issues with the fitness industry and many of the fitness modalities that people like to follow, whether it's circuit training or high intensity interval training classes, things like this, they don't have the ability to progress the stimulus over time. On average, over time, training should get harder. we should be aiming to set rep personal bests across multiple sets for all exercises. So this isn't even just specifically for hypertrophy. It's not just about, setting a new record for a 1 rep max or a 5 rep max. It's actually getting better across multiple sets of all the exercises you're doing. So that includes your lat pull down, your bicep curl, your calf raise, your lunge, whatever it may be, but we're looking for improvements across all of those sets. You might just be increasing reps by 1 each week, or you might actually be able to increase your load every now and then. Another way that you can look at progression is just improvements in how you are feeling or how you are performing that particular exercise. So I feel if I did the same weight, same reps, same load each week, but it started to get easier and easier, that is also progression. But it gets to a point where it's going to get so easy to the point where you need to actually increase the stimulus and progress by either increasing load, reps, or sets. So we're going to run through a few different progression methods here. Single progression is one that generally we can use on those big barbell lifts, and we can use a lot of single progression in the early days of our training for beginners, novices, and early intermediates. Basically, it is adding load or reps or sets and holding other variables constant. So as an example of this, generally what you'd see is, say someone's doing a barbell squat, they're going to do 3 sets of 5, right? And this is a load progression for 3 sets of 5. Week 1, 3 sets of 5 at 100 kilograms. Week 2, 3 sets of 5 at 102.5 kilograms. And then week 3, 3 sets of 5 at 105 kilograms. So as you can see, the amount of sets that we're doing is 3, and it's staying static throughout the load progression. And then the number of reps is also staying static throughout this mesocycle of training. The only thing that's changing here is the load. So we're progressing the load each week if we can. Now, obviously, this can't happen forever. It gets to a point where you can't just progress and load every single week. And that's when we start looking at double progression. Adding reps first, then load, and holding the number of sets constant. So as an example of this, for example, if someone's doing a bench press, 3 sets of 8 to 10. So now you can see we have a rep range of 8 to 10 as opposed to just 5. So week 1, they might do 3 sets of 8, 8, 8 at 70 kilograms. Week 2, they're going to increase their reps by 1 because they're able to progress. They've adapted to the load. They've recovered and they've come back stronger. So they're doing 999 at 70. And then week 3, again, able to progress just by 1 rep, 10, 10, 10 at 70. And then week 4 is where we actually increase the load. So they've progressed to a point, they're at the end of their rep range. They're at the end of the rep range, which is 10. They're able to increase the load and they go up to 72.5, but they would bring their reps back down to the beginning of that rep range and start again. So week 4, they're back at sets of 8, but with a heavier load. Okay, so that way we're progressing the reps over time, and then only when we're at the end of a rep range is when we increase our load. So it gives us a lot longer time scale between increases in load and gives our body a little bit longer to adapt. And this is generally how most people are going to end up training, is using rep ranges and using this double progression system to give their body time to adapt, because strength and hypertrophy does take a long time. And then another really cool progression scheme that I like to use with a lot of clients who are, early intermediates all the way through to advanced trainees is linear wave progression. Increasing the load and reduce the number of reps each week within a rep range, for example, 6 to 8, and completing multi-week cycles. The load being used will increase every repeat of the cycle. So in this type of progression system, we're only increasing load every cycle as opposed to every week. So we'll give you an example of using a deadlift here. 3 sets and using a rep range of 6 to 8. So in week 1, we would be doing 3 sets of 8 at 120 kilograms as an example. This is the first wave. Week 2, we drop the reps. So instead of going up in repetitions here, we're actually decreasing reps, but we're increasing the load. So week 2, we go down to 7s, and we're able to increase that load because at less repetitions, we should be stronger. So I'm able to go up to 125 kilograms. In week 3, I'm able to do 130 kilograms because I've dropped the reps down to 6. So as you can see, I increase the load every single week, but I decrease the repetitions. Now at week 4, this is my next wave coming through because I'm now going back up to 8 repetitions, but I'm using a heavier load than the last time I did 8 repetitions. If you can see in week 1 there, I did 8 reps at 120, but on my second wave in week 4, I can now do 8 reps at 125. So as you can see, the load being used only increases every repeat of the cycle. And you can see how this pans out across the macro cycle, a half a year or so of training. We can see that volume goes drastically down and up throughout the different cycles as we go through these different waves of progression, but total volume over time actually substantially increases. So it is a really good way of training specifically for those heavy barbell lifts, your squats, deadlifts, bench press, overhead press, which are not going to be progressing week to week. But if we use a wave linear progression like this, we can actually progress those exercises, every month or so and see some really good tangible progress there. But the key takeaway from that, obviously that was a bit of a deep dive into some of the different progression methods, and there's many others that we can use as well. But the key takeaways is that we need to ensure we are progressing the stimulus over time. We can't just go into the gym and lift the same load, the same reps, and the same sets for the foreseeable future. We have to progress something. And in saying that, I do want to make the point that it doesn't have to be massive progressions every week either. You've got the rest of your life to lift and progress. You don't need to be increasing the load by 10 kilograms every single time you go into the gym. This is something that all young trainees probably do make the mistake of doing, but we need to make sure that we are looking at the long game, knowing that hypertrophy and strength gain is a very long, slow process, and we have to give it time. Recovery, the forgotten component. So I want to quickly touch on what fatigue and recovery actually does to our performance and our fitness, and then we can discuss how we can dissipate some of that fatigue, get rid of that fatigue so that we can perform at our best and continue to perform and progress over a long training career. So as you can see here, and this is pretty self-explanatory, it's pretty common sense, the effect of a single session on fitness and performance. And these graphs are from the muscle and strength pyramids from Eric Helms. Before training, fitness is really high, and we have performance and we have a decent amount of performance, and fatigue is very low. After that training session, your fitness has gone up a little bit, so you've actually been able to improve your fitness. And fitness in this context means any expression of whatever you're training. So for example, your fitness might be your barbell, your ability to perform a 1RM barbell squat. It also may mean your ability to do a 100-meter sprint. Whatever it is that you are training, your fitness within this context is alluding to that, your ability to perform at that. So fatigue climbs after that first training session. And then after recovery time, fatigue comes all the way down, but our performance increases because we've allowed adequate recovery. So this makes total sense, right? We're going to go through a training session. We're going to probably have some level of fatigue climb up, and performance will be decreased for a certain period of time. But if we allow adequate recovery time, we come back after we've recovered, our fitness will have improved, but also our performance will have improved as well, so that in the next session, we can do more than we did the last time. So the fitness fatigue model changes in performance over a typical week. So you can see here that fitness over a week consistently climbs, but fatigue and performance are going up and down throughout the week. But what we're looking at is that gradual climb of fitness. As you can see at a training session here, we hit a training session, performance declines and fatigue climbs higher. Then we rest and we allow fatigue to dissipate, and then performance climbs up again before we hit that next session, and it dips down again. And so we have this constant up and down of fatigue and performance. But if everything's going really well, as you can see in this graph here, down the bottom there where we see that straight red line of fatigue, if everything's going well and we're recovering well within the time scales before our next training session, then our fitness and performance will consistently climb over time as well. But inevitably throughout the course of a training cycle, a mesocycle of 6 to 8 weeks, we'll get to the point where we may want to increase volume via sets, via reps, or via load. We may want to increase our amount of work that we're doing. And this, in all likelihood, can lead to fatigue outpacing our ability to perform and recover. So if fatigue is outpacing recovery, we get to a point where you see that red line coming up and we see the yellow line of performance dipping down. So you'll get to a point in your training cycle where maybe your sessions actually start to regress. You start to, not be able to perform as well in the gym. You're doing less weight, less reps, whatever it may be. And you also psychologically might not be in the best place to be training either. You're sick of training. Maybe your joints are a bit beat up and you're just not in a really good place to be continuing this mesocycle. And so as you can see, fitness also climbs up, but then it kind of flatlines as we go into that higher amount of training. But with adequate deloads and recovery periods, which we're going to cover in just a moment, we can see that if we take an adequate deload at that dotted line there, once fatigue is built up to a point where we're starting to regress in the gym, we take a deload or a recovery week of training, and fatigue dissipates really fast. And the beauty about fatigue is that it dissipates faster than fitness does. So even if we take that down week of training, a low week of training, our fitness will still be there and we'll be able to come back and perform at our best on the next training cycle. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of how fatigue works and accumulates throughout a training cycle and the essential nature of ensuring that we have recovery days but also recovery weeks built into our training programs. And I think this is probably one of the most forgotten sides of training in the general fitness population, is that they just keep going, and not take into account how their body's feeling and the importance of recovery. So brings us on to deloads. How do we use deloads? A deload is reduced training volume in order to let fatigue go down and express your full potential fitness, as we talked about, in the form of performance. So who needs a deload? If you are seeing performance go down. So as we talked about, if you start seeing regression in the gym, in all likelihood, you're probably just under recovered, or you're not sleeping enough, or you're not taking enough protein, or you're just too stressed, whatever's, there's a whole bunch of range of factors that will go into this. But in all likelihood, you potentially are just under recovered and you need a deload. And generally a deload is a week of training. Sometimes I'll do a couple of deload sessions, or sometimes I'll do a half week of deload, and then we can go back into the cycle. But generally, as a rule of thumb, a deload is about a week of training. So another reason is if you're feeling beat up, so joints, connective tissues, and chronic muscle soreness. If you're feeling like everything's a bit achy, everything's a bit sore, and you're just kind of a little bit run down all the time, it's probably a good point to be taking a deload. If you're mentally not into it, so if you're psychologically not wanting to go into train, it's not exciting anymore. I know for myself, I'm actually in the last week of a training mesocycle at the moment. Volume's quite high, I'm quite fatigued, I'm quite tired, and I'm mentally not really that geared up to go and train each time. So I know for myself, this is probably the perfect time to be implementing a deload next week. So how do you do it? Number one, you drop the number of sets by 1. So if you're doing, 3 sets of bench press on your Monday, then you're going to drop that down to 2 sets, right? And if you're doing 4 sets of deadlifts on a Wednesday, you'll drop that down to 3 sets. So a real simple rule of thumb, just drop your sets by 1. Then you'll drop your reps by 2. So if you're doing that 3 sets of bench press on the Monday, and you're going to drop it down to 2 sets, and if before you were doing 10 repetitions, this time you're just going to do 8. So it's only going to be a 2 by 8 as opposed to 3 by 10. So a decent drop in volume in order to allow that fatigue to reduce. And then generally we would keep the load the same. We may decrease it by a small amount, but as a general rule of thumb, keeping the load relatively the same is going to be fine because we're reducing the reps and the volume. So it shouldn't actually be that difficult to complete those sets of training. And nothing close to failure, ensuring that everything is over 2 to 3 reps in reserve. So generally staying around 4 reps in reserve is a good place to be on deload weeks. you go in there, you get some semi-hard training in, but it's nothing that's gonna, you shouldn't have to get psychologically prepared for a set. You shouldn't have to get psyched up. And as soon as that set starts getting a little bit hard, you're basically stopping the set there, recovering, and then going again. So it's a nice recovery week of training. You can, get excited about the gym again. And then the important part is implementing these deloads so that the next week you come in to train, you're ready to perform at your best again. And that's the whole point, is to reduce fatigue and come back stronger. As we come into the end of this presentation here, guys, we want to talk about actually measuring hypertrophy. So it's all well and good building muscle mass and knowing how to do it, but how do we actually measure it? And it's one of the harder things to do, and I wouldn't put too much stock in any of these methods of measurement. I think if you are consuming enough calories, consuming enough protein, as we've already talked about, and implementing the methods of training that we've discussed in this presentation, and you do that for a significant amount of time, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it may be, in a nice long progressive phase, you're going to be seeing muscle mass, especially if you're seeing scale weight increases. So number one, you're going to want to make sure that there's some level of disruption to the muscle. You should feel the muscles doing something after a training session. So you shouldn't just be, you might not be sore all the time. And I don't think, measuring progress by muscle soreness is a great way of measuring hypertrophy. We shouldn't just be going into the gym trying to seek soreness. We should be seeking progression. But there might be a little bit of muscle soreness or a little bit of disruption. If you leave a session, you're like, oh, I kind of feel like my chest worked a little bit there. That's a good sign. Okay, we want to make sure that there is some level of tension there. Secondly, it's specific to gaining phases. So if you have someone who's chosen the route of, hey, I'm going to actually, focus on gaining some body weight for the next 6 months or whatever it may be, then we want to see scale weight increases. And if you're seeing scale weight increases, yes, some of that will be body fat. That's just the nature of the game. But also some of that, a small percentage of that, will actually be lean muscle tissue. So we do want to monitor scale weight and see that climbing up over time. Now, obviously, if you're someone who's choosing the fat loss approach and aiming to gain lean tissue during that fat loss phase, then that's not going to apply. But we still want to be monitoring scale weight. Increasing training performance across multiple sets, specifically on isolation exercises. So as was discussed, we want to see progression, and we want to see that progression across multiple sets of an exercise. A great way to know if you're building muscle in your training is to measure your progression specifically on isolation exercises. So if you look at the leg extension, for example, you're locked into a seat, you can't really move, you can't really cheat the movement. So every bit of progression that I see, whether that's a week, every week I'm putting a rep or two on my sets, or maybe I'm able to add a little bit of load, generally that is signifying that new tissue has been created. Whereas if you look at something like a barbell squat or a bench press or something like that, where there's a lot more technical components to it, there is a higher chance that if I'm progressing, I'm seeing neurological changes or technique changes. Yeah, so I'm just getting better at doing those lifts. I may be building muscle tissue, but it's not a given. Whereas if I'm on an isolation exercise like a leg extension or a bicep curl, where there's less chance for me to cheat the movement, it's not something I really have to practice a whole lot to get really good at the movement. And if I'm progressing on that, there's a high chance that that's going to be increases in lean tissue. Another thing you can do is measure your body parts. So if you're seeing increases in girth measurements around your biceps, your chest, your quads, it's a good chance that there's some lean tissue coming on there. We have to also be aware that is also going to measure the body fat in those areas as well. So if you are gaining body fat, the measurement will also come up. But it is something nice to track over time and, just see how that's progressing over time. And it might be something you want to do. It's not something I do with everybody, but it is something you can do if you want to use those metrics. And then, of course, one of the most important things is taking progress photos. And I say taking them at 4 weeks as a maximum. So don't take them any more frequently than that. 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, maybe every 8 weeks is a good place to do it. You want to give your body time to adapt and actually change as a result of that training. Doing them too frequently, you're not really going to see too much changes between them. So progress photos are another great way to do it. Big tip with that one is just ensuring that you're doing them in the same place, same time of day, with the same clothing on each time and trying to do the same poses each time. So you might be doing a contracted pose, a muscle pose, whatever it may be, or you might be relaxed. But it's up to you, just ensuring that it is consistent over time. So guys, nice long presentation, diving deep into lifting. Let's summarize this thing and give you some practical take-homes. Number one, stop relying on subpar fitness classes. As we've discussed, they're not going to give you the results you need because they don't have the underlying component of hypertrophy, which is providing stimulus and then progressing that stimulus over time. Number two, you want to design or have one designed for you. If you're training with me, if I'm coaching you, or if you've got another coach to provide a program for you, a program that puts you in the sweet spot for hypertrophy. And what we're looking for is 10 to 20 sets per body part per week, spread over the number of sessions you can do. So ideally 3 or so sessions up to 5 sessions or so a week, with sufficient proximity to failure, leaving on average 2 reps in the tank. Okay, so that's generally what we want to look for training. If your training currently doesn't measure up to these specific requirements, have a look at it, chat to your coach, see if you can adapt some things to ensure that you are hitting at least 10 sets per muscle group per week. You're spreading them over the week, however works for you and your lifestyle, and you've got enough intensity there to ensure that we are providing the stimulus for hypertrophy. Number 3, understand how to progress load. If not progressing, first assess sleep, protein intake, and stress. If you can tick all those things off, if you're doing all those really well, then you want to ensure that you are progressing across those exercises, as we've discussed, using single progression, double progression, and wave linear progression. But if you are still no longer progressing, then we want to make sure that we are implementing regular deloads to dissipate fatigue. And generally, I would use a deload every 4 to 8 weeks in a training cycle. And lastly, we want to measure progress through performance, scale increases, and regular progress shots. And that's basically what it comes down to for lifting, for hypertrophy, ensuring that we're covering off and checking these boxes across your training cycle and across your training career, ensuring that you're providing the stimulus so that we can change the body over time. Whether you're in a fat loss phase or in a muscle gain phase, these requirements still are appropriate and they still should be adhered to as well. So guys, hopefully that helped. Hopefully it didn't go too far over your heads. If you've got any questions, of course, ask me. I'd love to chat about this more. It's really interesting stuff to me. And hopefully you can implement some of these things, take them away, get into the gym and lift some weight.